about what we as motorcyclists can do and should do. Now, I believe some of us here who are here in the group today who are talking are all die-hard, passionate people. There needs to be more stories from motorcyclists, experiences that need to come out. One of the things that probably like the Talk Tales intends to do, because people have to hear more stories about motorcycle, how to do, because many of us probably when we start riding, we are scared, we are skeptical, we are not confident, and we can gain confidence from looking at what others have done. And more experience sharing of motorcyclists should come. Um, the second thing I would like to talk is about the image of a motorcyclist. Now, motorcyclists unfortunately carry a little bad image in the society. When they see, you know, a roaring motorcycle going around, when people start seeing kids doing wheelie on the streets. So motorcyclists are typically misunderstood to be a bunch of rogues or people who do not respect others. And I think what is very important is being a motorcyclist, being a sensible citizen. Um, it is our duty to create that perception about motorcyclists among others. So every act that you do as a motorcyclist does not only harm the image of the individual, but it starts forming a perception about the community that we are from. Now, motorcycling, to me, is a religion. Motorcycling, we all follow a similar religion. We all have similar faiths. We all have similar passion. Now, any wrong that one does affects the others. And therefore, we need to be responsible as motorcyclists that we create the right perception in the market, right perception in the society. Um, now, what is it that we could do more? You know, I think being motorcyclists who love freedom, um, I there is a lot that we all can associate ourselves with nature. Invariably, most of us tend to take more from nature. Now, as motorcyclists, if we all take a pledge that we will give back more than we take from the world, and not only in the form of planting trees to compensate for the carbon footprint that we create, but there are many ways that we can contribute. Being motorcyclists, we could talk about, we could encourage road safety, we could encourage that we create more better sensible riders on the road. We could educate people, and we could inculcate a habit among people who are on road. Now that is all, all this and more can be done from passionate motorcyclists like us. Now, I'm a very strong believer that for any culture to flourish, there needs to be an ecosystem, and an ecosystem that can sustain. And these are like both of them need to be are dependent on each other, and a rider needs an ecosystem, and the ecosystem needs motorcyclists to survive. Now, some of us, who are into motorcycling and we have this passion, have the responsibility to either create that ecosystem or help people in creating that ecosystem for motorcyclists. Like today, as motorcyclists, when I talk to a lot of people, I understand and hear from them that we don't have the right kind of place for a motorcyclist to live. You know, motorcyclist is always a person who is cost conscious because he would rather spend more money on his motorcycle than on a luxury resort. And so you need to have motorcycling places where it is apt for a motorcyclist to live. You don't have the right pit stops on the highway to get your bike fixed. You don't have the right training schools that are available for either teaching riding or even to maintain your bike. Now, this ecosystem has to evolve. And for this ecosystem to evolve, there could be two ways. One is that some of us passionate motorcyclists try and create that ecosystem. The second is that we know what we want and we go and tell people how to create that kind of an infrastructure for us. And then it will become mutually beneficial for both sides. So the community culture has seen a huge uh, growth in the last 25 years from the time I started the first community in 95, and that's only going to grow. And the infrastructure, the road infrastructure is improving, the connectivity is improving, and people would love to spend more and more time traveling and exploring. But then uh, that's on the riding culture, touring culture. But the other culture is something that will evolve, and we will have to, create that together. Because as motorcyclists, there are two things that I believe. One, like we have to respect the classics, the older generation of motorcycle and the motorcyclists, because they did what they did during their era, and from that helped evolve to the stage that we are in. And we need to do something for the motorcyclist community so that it can evolve further for the next generation, so that the motorcycling culture in India keeps growing, keep evolving, and we continue to become a larger community and follow one large religion, of motorcycling. So these are some of the small things that I wanted to share from where I come, and I've been associated with the industry from 92. So it's been 28 years that I've been associated with the motorcycle industry in India. And I've seen the industry evolve and would love to see the industry evolve at a much faster pace in the next decade or so. And good to see that uh, there's so many motorcyclists or people passionate about motorcycle today, and wanting to be connected, wanting to share their experiences. And I would love to, share my personal experiences with you. Anyone who wishes to connect with me, even after this session, may feel free to do so. And even after my session, because I'm leaving all the safety aspect to Carrie. Carrie is, brings tons of experience of motorcycling and road safety. And that's the reason I've tried to keep completely away, because he would do far more justice to that topic than I could. Um, and but after Carrie session, if there are questions on motorcycling, on generic motorcycling, I would love to discuss on the forum. Thanks, Sriram.
Great. Thanks a lot, Naveen. I think that was very, very insightful, very evidently coming from an experienced rider, from a motorcycling perspective. And I think one of the attempts, like you said, very important to bring those stories out so that it continues to inspire more and more riders. And we can see that from the participation today as well. Thanks a lot for those insights. I'm sure that there are a lot of questions. We will keep them coming your way after Carrie's session, and please do hang around. Um, Thanks a lot for that. And thanks for taking time out with us, Naveen. Appreciate that. So that was.
Thanks.
So now, everybody, we'll move on to our next speaker, Mr. Carrie Griffiths. I'm going to quickly ask Carrie to unmute. Yeah. So I'll give a brief introduction of Carrie for people who are not aware. Carrie Griffiths is the national president of IAM RoadSmart in New Zealand. He has ridden motorcycles for over 40 years, and currently rides a BMW R1200 GS. So he comes with tremendous experience in riding. Not only that, he also has a strong interest in road safety, and he's been previously a police officer for 20 years, with around 10 years of involvement in road safety. After retiring from the police force as a national road policing manager at the rank of a superintendent, Carey went on to lead the development of New Zealand's motorcycle safety strategy for the Motorcycle Safety Advisory Council and Accident Compensation Corporation. He now works as a manager for New Zealand's health and safety regulator, WorkSafe New Zealand. Welcome, Carrie. Thanks a lot for taking time out on a Sunday. I mean, it's late night, or it's nighttime in New Zealand. Thanks a lot, and I'd like to hand over the forum to you. And Carrie would be talking about various aspects of safety and his experience in New Zealand, on the riding aspects. Welcome, Carrie. You can start now. Let us just ensure that he's able to talk. Yeah. Carrie, are you able to?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry, my microphone wasn't working very well.
No. Over to you.
So namaste and kia ora from New Zealand. So sorry about the microphone issue. It was very interesting listening to Naveen. We've had a similar journey with New Zealand. We're a Commonwealth country and very much an English influence and a lot of British bikes in the early 20th century. So it was very common for our grandfathers and fathers to be riding Triumphs, AJS, Royal Enfields, really quite common. And in fact, Royal Enfield is still quite a strong brand here in New Zealand. And in the late 1960s and beginning into the 1970s, we had the emergence of Japanese motorbikes. And they were very popular for us at the time. As young men, they were cheap transport. So as a young man, you would get a bike usually before you got a car. And unfortunately for us, we were also killing ourselves at a great rate in the 60s and 70s as well. What we saw, though, was a change, though, in the 1990s. We saw New Zealand open its markets up to Japanese imported vehicles. So suddenly a motorcycle wasn't the cheapest option for a young man to get on the road and see his girlfriend. A Japanese car was. So motorcycles became a lot less popular. So a lot less people got into riding, and motorcycling had really dropped away, and particularly dropped away in 2008 with the global financial crisis. So people were still riding, but just not in the same numbers as in the 1970s. But then what we saw after that global financial crisis is people like myself who had ridden motorcycles when they were young men had more money and started to buy motorcycles again. So what was happening is we were buying bigger bikes, we were touring more, we had more older riders coming back onto the road who hadn't ridden for maybe 20 or 30 years, getting onto powerful motorcycles, and they were killing themselves, and particularly on the open road. So I was at that stage involved in road policing in New Zealand, and we were, as policemen, regularly going to fatal crashes involving young riders. And that really got me interested in terms of, well, what could we do about it? And it seems quite a difficult problem because it's very difficult to protect the riders and motorcyclists, and particularly young men do crazy things on bikes. And there's just so little protection, even with the best gear. If you hit a car at 100 kilometers an hour, you're going to get killed. So what we're seeing now in New Zealand is a lot more newer brands, bigger machines. We're also seeing the emergence of electric bicycles taking over some of that entry-level motorcycling. So where people would have got into maybe a scooter or a low-powered motorcycle, we're seeing more people getting into electric bicycles. Now, part of the challenge in New Zealand for many of us is when we set our driver's license, you had a little bit of training. You often learned from a friend. So people would show you how to ride the motorcycle, some basic controls, and then you were on your own. If you could pass your license, that was generally it. So while there were some commercial motorcycle trainers around, a lot of people, and myself included, just didn't take advantage of that. We didn't want to pay several $100s for a day's training because as motorcyclists, we all thought we were pretty good. And that's been a real challenge, and it's been a real challenge for New Zealand. So we've developed a real safety focus here. And before I get into that, I'll talk about what IAM is, because the two things meet together. So IAM, or the Institute of Advanced Motorcyclists, started in 1956 in England, and very shortly after it came across to New Zealand. And it was based on a system called roadcraft. It was developed as a way of training police drivers, and initially focused on cars. It was a way of training police drivers to drive in a way that minimized their chances of crashing. And the study showed that drivers who went through that system were involved in less crashes. And that's emerged as one of the largest road safety organisations in the world. Now, New Zealand also grew similarly, but in a much smaller way to the UK. We're a small country. We've only just hit 5 million. So IAM in New Zealand has always been very small. And when I look at the size of your organisation, we're very, very tiny in comparison. What we do is we use the system of roadcraft, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But what we have is we have a series of mentors. They're mentors who help coach people, and we call them observers. So what happens is when somebody joins our organisation, they get paired up with an observer. The observer goes out with them, and the observer's trained to a very high level. And they'll ride with them, and they'll look at what errors they're making, what mistakes they make, and they'll help develop their skills up to a stage where they can sit an advanced test. And that might take 6 months, it might take a year, depends on the skills of the person you're working with. We don't train new people coming in. We work with already experienced motorcyclists, and we also do the same with car drivers. So I'm an observer for motorcycles. I'm also an observer for cars. And what we do is we help develop people to this advanced test. Now, the challenge for us, though, is we're a small organisation and we're a charity. So all of us working as observers have full-time jobs doing other things. I work in government doing other things. So I'm observing in my spare time. Also in New Zealand, we have an organisation called ACC, and that's the Accident Compensation Corporation. So New Zealand is quite unique. We're one country, we've got one legal system, we've got one police, and we've got one accident compensation corporation that covers the country. So every New Zealander pays through their wages, through their taxes, whether you're self-employed, whether you're on a benefit, whether you're working in any industry, you pay a proportion of your income goes to ACC. And also as motorcyclists, a proportion of our motor vehicle registration cost each year goes to ACC, and that money's kept to one side and invested. So if I have an accident on my motorcycle, what ACC does is it pays my wages, up to 80% of my wages while I'm injured. That could be for a week, it could be for 20 years. They will pay 80% of my salary. They'll also pay my rehabilitation costs. So if I'm injured and taken in an ambulance to hospital, I don't need to worry about paying for that ambulance trip. I don't need to worry about paying for my hospital care. ACC is a really good scheme. But part of the challenge that ACC had with all us older motorcyclists coming in is we're expensive to fix. So if you've got an older rider who's earning a good salary and he's injured, and you've got to pay 80% of his salary. That's a lot of money. And also, as older riders, we don't bounce on the road as well. So we get more badly injured. We take longer to fix. We cost more money. So ACC said, hang on a minute, this is getting really expensive to fix these older riders. And one of the fears we had in New Zealand was that the government could potentially say riding is too dangerous, it costs too much money, there's too many people killed, so we might ban it. So the last thing we want is to have that to happen. So after I left police, I went to work for ACC, and part of my focus was to develop the motorcycle safety strategy, and we took an evidence-based approach to that and had a look at what was killing motorcyclists in New Zealand. Because when you talk to motorcyclists, they all say the same thing. Well, they certainly said the same thing, was it's not our fault, it's car drivers killing us, or it's bad roads. It's all about everybody else, it's not about us. But when we had a look at the facts, what we knew is that riders on the open road were involved in nearly 3/4 of the fatal motorcycle crashes. They often lost control on bends and curves. By themselves, there usually weren't any other vehicles involved. They had more severe injuries because they were riding on the open road, but they also saw the training of skills as something as important to them. In the urban environment, which was much more congested and at much lower speeds, they actually crashed more. They were involved in almost 2/3 of all motorcycle injury crashes, but because they're going more slowly, they were less likely to be severely injured or killed. And they were often injured at intersections. And they were also less likely to wear proper protective gear. There were more people in T-shirts and not wearing proper helmets and on smaller motorcycles. And what we saw with car drivers and truck drivers and other drivers is they were primarily at fault in just over 1/3 of motorcycle crashes. So 2/3 of the problem was ours as motorcyclists, and we had to own it. And it's a difficult conversation with motorcyclists because we tend to see the faults of other drivers, but not ourselves. So as I worked through the strategy, we looked at what were the areas that we could focus on. There was a really big tendency to say, let's spend a lot of money and tell car drivers to look out for motorcyclists and put signs up and have advertising saying, be careful around motorcyclists. But the evidence showed there was absolutely no effect in doing that at all. Car drivers usually don't see motorcyclists for a variety of reasons, and it's usually because they're looking for bigger objects and more dangerous objects, like other cars and trucks and buses. And motorcycles are small, and the way the brain perceives it, they're not going to see bikes. So one of the ways we approached it is, well, if drivers aren't going to see motorcyclists, how can we get motorcyclists to be more careful around cars? So we developed the strategy across five areas. So the first one, and the most important one, which is why it's first, was to improve rider skills in New Zealand. And that's something we do as IAM, but we're small. But with ACC having millions and millions of dollars available, that was something that ACC could invest in. So rider skills and rider coaching was really important. The second part of the strategy was around human factors, which was addressing driver attitudes and rider attitudes. Now, some of that is advertising campaigns, but we took that again back to training. If you get people trained and you build a mindset that if you're a helicopter pilot or you fly a fighter jet or an aircraft, you get professional development. You want to be the best you can be. You want to be the best pilot. We're trying to bring that back to motorcycling as well. You want to be the best rider you can be, really skilled, really safe. So we're trying to turn that around. The third one was around vehicle technologies. So when you looked at the research, one of the biggest things you could do to reduce motorcycle crashes, not just in New Zealand, but internationally, was to introduce anti-lock brakes, ABS brakes on motorcycles. And it's good to see that many countries have mandated that now. But there were numerous international studies that showed you could reduce serious injuries and fatal crashes by up to 1/3 by having ABS brakes. Too many riders approaching hazards panic, grab the brakes really hard, slide into what they're looking at instead of being able to steer around it. So one thing we did is work with government to help introduce ABS brakes into the New Zealand market, which has recently been achieved. The fourth pillar of the strategy was around personal protective equipment, was wearing the best helmet, the best gear you can. So I personally, I spend a lot of money on safety gear. I wear an airbag vest. I wear a Helite vest. It's tethered to my motorcycle. It's not the most expensive system there, but if I'm thrown from the motorcycle, it will inflate. One of my friends bought one as a result of me buying one. He was recently struck from behind on his Kawasaki motorcycle by another bike doing over 100 kilometers an hour. He went over the handlebars, landed on his back on the ground at speed. His bike was destroyed. And I asked him, because he was fine, I asked him how it went, and he said it was like landing on his bed. No injuries, nothing. So I'm very sold on that. But personal protective equipment, getting riders to wear the basics: gloves, strong trousers, boots, helmets, good quality jackets. One thing ACC has been doing is working with the Australians and the MotorCat program, and what they are doing is they're assessing the safety of motorcycle gear. So helmets are already done, but looking at how good is your jacket, how good are your pants, how protective are your gloves, do they pull off easily, does your jacket lift up, does it fail or burst when you hit the road? So there's a lot of work going into that. And then the fifth pillar was roads and roadsides. So it's working with our road builders, our road controlling authorities, to build roads that are more forgiving of motorcyclists, so that have better curves, gravel cleared up off the side of the road, just trying to make roads better. Now that's always a challenge, because roads are built for cars, and no matter how good the road is, there's always one hazard on there. A car might have dropped some oil, there might be some stones or you know, anything on there. A lot of it all came back, however, to rider skills. So what ACC has done is they also use the Roadcraft system, and I'll talk about what Roadcraft is in a minute, but Roadcraft is the basis of what we teach in IAM, and it's what ACC teaches. So they've contracted a whole lot of professional trainers. They pay them a subsidy, and it means that as a rider, I can do a bronze course or a silver course or a gold course, depending on my experience. In many cases, for me, it's free. The trainer gets paid $250 by ACC, and people get 8 hours of training with a professional trainer. So ACC has found that by investing in that, they've had thousands of riders go through that. They're seeing a reduction in the number of injury claims. So it's cost effective for them. So they're wanting to put more money into it, but it took a while to get running. So IAM and the ACC providers, a lot of our examiners and providers are also ACC providers. So we're a very close community, and we work well together with each other. And you know, we're really seeing benefits. We still have challenges though with people doing stupid things on motorcycles who don't want to take training because they think they're really, really good on the motorcycle. But if I just talk about Roadcraft for a moment, and this is the heart of the system, and this applies to most professional training in the world now has strong elements of this. And there's 5 parts to it, and we call it IPSCA, which is an acronym, and it stands for I is information. So it's about how, as riders, we take information from the environment. What can we see? What can't we see? What can we reasonably expect to happen? So, you know, you might see a truck coming towards you and you think, well, I'm going to expect somebody might reasonably be going to overtake that. So what's my position on the road? So we're taking information all the time. We're using that information. It's how we use it. And we also give information to other road users about what our intentions are. So we're being really, really clear. The next part of it is P, of IPSCA. P stands for position. And we position ourselves for maximum view. So what we do is we if you've got a right-hand bend, we will be out to the left-hand side in the left-hand wheel track, so we can see round that right-hand bend. If we're going around a left-hand bend, we'll be out to the right, so we can maximize our view through there. So we can always stop in that distance of road that we can see in front of us. So that's really important. So we use all of the road and we position ourselves for view, but we have a hierarchy in that we don't give up our safety or our stability in order to take a view. So we follow the line of it's safety first, stability, and then view. So if we can't see, we slow down. So you don't just fly into a corner with a racing line, assuming the way's clear, because it's probably not. The S of IPSCA is speed, so it's appropriate speed for the conditions, and that's a fairly obvious one. G is gear, so it's the right gear. So using the as in a gear on the motorcycle, not gear that you wear. So it's making sure that you're using the gearbox in the motorcycle appropriately, that you're slowing down, that you're accelerating appropriately. And the last part is acceleration. And by acceleration, we mean using accelerative sense on the motorcycle. So using the throttle to make sure the motorcycle is either loaded to the rear or loaded to the front, depending on what you're wanting to do, and being really precise with the throttle to control what that motorcycle is doing. So that whole thing is called IPSCA, IPSGA, and that it's a very simplistic way of putting it, but that's the heart of the system that we teach. So when it comes down to motorcycle groups and I'm talking to them, so the sort of questions we'll ask is, when did you last have somebody who really knows their stuff look at your riding and take on board, listen to them in terms of what they say about your riding? How good are you? How safe are you? Have you had a trainer look at you? Do you have the opportunity to work with a trainer? And that's what differs us from other clubs. So a lot of clubs get together socially, go and have a ride somewhere, and it's great. And some people will be really fast and crazy, and some people will be slow down the back. What we really focus on is the safety element. We still do things socially and have a good time, but the best part about the group is that everybody's riding to a standard. Anyone crazy in there will soon get kicked out or get trained up. And yeah, we really enjoy what we do. Our biggest challenge is people using their spare time. We'd love to be bigger so we could employ people to do this, but that would then affect us being a charity and cause us all sorts of other issues. But it's very enjoyable. I've found at a personal level, I enjoy my riding more. I used to just get on a motorcycle and ride it. I'd go from A to B. I wouldn't think about how I was riding. Now when I get on a motorcycle, I'm thinking about where I am on the road, why I'm there. I'm thinking about my riding. Because one of the biggest risks we have is when you're riding, but your brain is out doing the shopping or thinking about the argument with your kids. So it's getting the brain back onto the ride with you is really important. So yeah, hopefully that's a little bit about what we do here in New Zealand.
Great, Gary. I think, especially on the training side, I don't think we look at it that way, or we've looked at it that way. We have ride briefings before every ride, but I think we have to also relook at, assessing each individual or giving them the opportunity to understand, skills that they can improve and make. And I think there are a lot of clubs that are participating in here today, and I believe the administrators of those clubs would take a cue, and we could also try and inculcate some of these best practices in the Indian motorcycle community. Thanks a lot, Gary. That was insightful, and I think some great points there. We will slowly try and move on to Q&As. I think we'll start with Naveen. Naveen, do you have the permission to unmute yourself? Are you able to unmute yourself? Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, I'll start with, I think I'm going to sort of club some questions together. Since Gary had just spoken about safety, I'd like to pass on a lead to you and, sort of add on from an Indian context, right? So, one question that is prominently coming out is, how do we build that sort of a, relevance and ecosystem here, right? How much is it with the motorcyclists ourselves? How much is it for brands that are coming out with motorcycles? How much is it with the government? Where do you see, how do you see us moving to that level of professionalism? I know the numbers are very different. We have, I don't think we can do it at that scale very quickly. But considering that we have, a large number of young Indians who are going to own motorcycles, going to own more powerful motorbikes and going to be on streets, how do you think we can build this ecosystem in India? And I think that's a question that's coming up from Mayank and a few others. So I've clubbed them together and probably let you answer that and give some context from
Yeah.
an Indian perspective too.
Now, good question. And I think the way I look at it is that uh, to build uh, a safe riding environment, everyone needs to play a role, right from regulatory bodies. So government has a role to play. Government has been insisting, like last year we moved to ABS, which is a good move. Then there are, and even in future, there are going to be more safety standards that will be thrust upon as a regulation by the government. So the government organizations have a role to play. The manufacturers have a role to play because I think as much as it is the duty of the manufacturers to make a product, depending on the product, if there is a manufacturer that is making a higher cc motorcycle, a very fast motorcycle, then I think they need to also take it upon themselves in what is it that they are doing in terms of educating and training the people who are going to be using the motorcycles. The third, I think the most important aspect is as motorcyclists, for each one of us to understand our limitations and our capabilities. And this is an area I think where most of us go wrong. We see somebody who is fast on the road and think that I can also ride fast. I think what's most important is for an individual to know his current limits, and then make efforts to go step by step forward. Uh, so if I know my limit, in terms of how fast my brain works, how flexible is my body, how fast my reflexes are, my ability to brake at high speeds, my ability to corner at high speeds, my ability to kick a corner on wet surfaces. Now I need to learn, that quickly and ride within my limits. Like India is a country of, we all love cricket, and we all hear the commentators saying that if you are not good at hooking the ball, don't hook. If you cannot play the square cut, don't play it. So you should know what is your strength and play to your strength. And I think we all need to, and that's something that I've seen people not doing much. They try to follow their peers and try to copy. And another very important aspect, I'll probably borrow a quote that I, heard from, in one of the things from Valentino Rossi. And he said that the most important thing is to have a good relationship with your bike. You have to understand what she wants. And therefore, understanding the bike that you ride and the capability of the bike and what she can do for you and what you can get out from the bike is also very important. So just to sum up, I think the role, each one has to play a role, from the regulatory bodies to the OEMs to the rider. And it is good to see that in India there are some of the riding schools that are coming up. So like there is the uh, California uh, Super Sports Training Center that has come up for the last 10 years. They have been running in Chennai. And there are similarly many more that are coming. So if there are people who want speed, they should probably go and join one of those learn the nuances of being on a fast motorcycle and train themselves.
Great, Naveen. Thanks a lot. So just following that on, Carrie, we have a few questions on safety. And I think what the audience would like to know is, I don't know if it's so prevalent in New Zealand, at least it's very much in India, that we take, we don't rely on just the stock, spares in the motorcycle, right? So we go with engine modifications, we do silencer mods, right? What's your opinion on those? Because there is a stock, set that comes in from the manufacturer, but then sometimes changing of tires, right? But in some cases we've seen that as riders ourselves that with the style of your riding, it might help in certain cases. So how does somebody go about doing this in a more qualified fashion? Are there some best practices out there? Can you share some insights on that? Sorry, Gary.
Thank you.
Unmute you, Ram.
Yeah, I can't unmute myself. I need you to do it for me. There's one really important component on a motorcycle, which is really important to keep updated, and that's the rider. The best way to get from A to B fast and smooth is to improve your own skills. But when we do look at the machine, what often gets neglected is suspension. So inadequate suspension or failing to maintain suspension is really important. We imported, we've run ACC, I say we as in New Zealand, we've run a series of seminars around the country for riders, and we brought a guy over from the United States called Dave Moss. And Dave Moss runs a motorcycle tuning and racing firm. Dave Moss Tuning, if you look him up. He has transformed a lot of motorcyclists thinking about their motorcycles. So, how often do you change the oil in your front suspension? How often do you change your rear shock absorber, or even adjust it so it's the right rebound and sag for your height? A lot of people don't know how to do it. They'll just get on the bike and ride it. So suspension is really important. Choice of tires is important. Most modern tires are pretty good. You normally outride your own skill before you outride the limitations of the tire, but that's assuming the tire is properly inflated and looked after. So having riders know what a good tire looks like, when they should replace it, what tire pressure to run at, suspension on the bike, making sure that's maintained and adjusted. They're the most important parts. What we find though is what riders like to do is put carbon fiber goodies on their bikes, noisy exhausts, and make the bike sound fast, or gives it a few more horsepower. But that really doesn't make you go any faster. You just think you're faster until you crash.
Naveen, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think Carrie has made some important points. The only thing that I would suggest for people who want to do modification, because as motorcyclists, all of us want to personalize our motorcycle. All of us want more out of our bikes. So I think what is important is to classify the modification we want to do. Is it aesthetic? Is it functional? Is it safety? As long as you're doing anything on the aesthetics, feel free, do it, because you can personalize the bike for yourself. If you're changing the functionality, if you want a little more power out of it, if you want to change the gearing ratios, you want to change the sprocket size, you want to change the handlebar to make the bike more ergonomically good for your body's posture and size, fair enough. I think you could do it with a little bit of an advice. But as the minute you go towards trying to change the safety of the vehicle, there are people who probably want to change the rake angle of the vehicle. They want to change the wheel size, go on a higher size or a lower size, depending. Now, when you do that, there's no harm doing it as long as you have the right advice from people who understand the safety aspect.
Great. So we'll slowly open up the forum for questions. I see a couple of hands raised up. Solomon, I've asked you to unmute. You can go ahead with your thoughts and questions.
Thanks, Sriram. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, Solomon, you can speak a bit
Okay.
louder as you're on your headphones. So
Okay, great. Is it better now?
yeah, I think so.
Okay. Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Naveen. I think those were beautiful insights. As a rider who spent about 30 years on the road, been riding all kinds of vehicles on the road for about 30 years now. I feel all the practical learnings that I've had through the years, whatever I feel I've learned, they're not formed ideas, but you know what you learn every single day when you see a certain incident or you go through a certain incident. You take your learnings from the situation. All of the learnings I felt, Kerry, you just summarized it beautifully. I felt I could relate to each one of the points that you made. And so, it was really good to know that there is a theory behind the practical, things that we've seen and learned through the years. So, I really appreciate the insights. I'm sure I'm going to go through the recording one more time. I'm going to take down the notes of all the things that you mentioned. There are a few things I would want to incorporate in my riding as well, like the safety features, which I would want to, kind of improve on. In terms of riding, I feel I would like to share one of the experiences. I think it will give a little bit of context to what you spoke on, Kerry. You spoke on the New Zealand aspect of things. I've had a very similar experience with the Indian context. I've grown up in the capital of the country, which is Delhi. And through my childhood, I've been riding there and I've been riding various kinds of vehicles, and I was a bit fast. Now, when I entered college, my dad actually bought me a CBG, Hero Honda CBG. That was known to be kind of a better racing machine than most which was available at that time on the road. It had a better ergonomics, it had a better, aerodynamics. And so I had a very good experience with that bike. Now, at the time when I bought it, which was almost like 2002, at that time we heard of a lot of crashes that used to happen across the, state, across Delhi, the NCR capital. We used to see a lot of those CBGs which were brand new and crashed and in very bad condition. We used to hear of a lot of these incidents because we knew that all the people who really went for the bike were not really equipped for the kind of upsides that it gave in terms of technology and the kind of aerodynamism that it gave. Now the feel of the bike was good, and so everybody was ripping, and so there was a crash that was waiting to happen. Now CBG was one of the bikes which introduced the disc brakes to the motorcycling world around that time, 2000, 2002. And I remember the disc brake was a new technology that time, and so people did not know how to use it. And I think what you highlighted as the ABS being, the solution for it was exactly the point. And I think we could have avoided a lot of crashes around that time if ABS was available. But now I think the Indian government is doing well in terms of bringing about the ABS into the country as a mandate, which is good. And I believe since my bike has ABS, I know I have faced a lot of those situations where, it's been a close call. And if not for the ABS, I, should have probably crashed. And so I feel that's my experience. And, I wanted to share this experience of the CBG from the 2000 kind of, time of riding. And as of right now, I think about 5 years ago, I started riding in an organized way. In 2015, I bought a Royal Enfield Bullet. And when I started riding in an organized way, I started learning all the safety aspects of riding afresh, like a new rider. And that has really helped me because I think in the riding community, we have a lot of people with experience. The people whom I rode with are very experienced and very talented. And so if I just learned from them like a good student, which I did, it has helped me a lot in being safe and in being, able to do more than what I could have done on my own, which is, long distance solo riding, which I've done, is something that I could not have thought of doing by myself. The kind of rider I was earlier, which was, just into speed and everything, not much into safety. So 5 years ago is when I started, identifying the world of safe riding, group riding, and then now I've kind of launched out into solo riding as well. So there's a lot of learning there. And I think one of the things which you had brought out of almost like a buddy plan, somebody who watches you, from a distance while riding. I think that gets incorporated automatically in our, riding communities. What we do is when we're riding in a group, we're always looking out for each other. For example, I do the work of marshalling for our community, our riding group. So whenever I do that, I keep moving up and down the entire, the stretch of 10, 50, 100 bikes. And then I keep looking out for people who are, either getting left behind or, they're not able
Solo,
to.
can you do the short other people?
Yeah, sure. I'm almost at the end. So this is something that is happening almost at our riding group automatically. So we are doing this kind of mentoring in our riding community when we do. And the other part is when we do start the ride, we do give out information of how we ride, what safety precautions to take, and all of that. I think that's also useful for new riders who need to upskill themselves on the knowledge. Now, that's as far as I wanted to share with you, Kerry. I think Kerry and Naveen, I had a lot of good points to take away. One question I have from you, Kerry, is what you do in New Zealand right now and what you have implemented. I see the last part of it as something which we in Indian context, I think it can be applied a little more easily than the other initiatives which are more organized, which are more commercial or maybe, have to be done at an organizational level. So the last part of, how to train, how to buddy up and how to, kind of give these trainings to individuals who are really interested in learning these skills. Now, people like us have learned all of this on the road through the zeal that we've had, the passion that we've had for riding. But there are some more who might not be able to do it the same way, who might need guidance in a very organized way. Now, if we want to implement it in our riding community the way we have it in India right now, do you see a possibility of how we can implement it through the riding community? Not the government, not the automotive industry, but the riding community per se, implement something so that in a collaborative way, we implement ideas that you have in New Zealand, we implement it here, and then we take it forward for all the riders who are interested.
Yes, there's got to be a demand for it. What's also important is that you have a standard. So one of the things with roadcraft is it's been established for over 60 years, and there is a set standard, and it's an international standard adopted by most trainers around the world. There are elements of roadcraft and everything. It's not the only way to train, but it's certainly the components are common sense. It's about good predictive analysis about what might happen, and acting accordingly. So roadcraft's not about being able to ride really quickly around a track. In fact, track riding develops other skills and shows people that they can go around corners faster than they thought they could before. But you've got to be careful with just training people on a track. So you need a standard that you work to, because all of our experiences are built with our interactions with others, and some of them are really good and some people are really experienced. But when you're a new rider and you've got somebody who seems they know what they're talking about, they can also teach you rather bad habits as well. So having a standard and holding people accountable to it is really important. So roadcraft's available. It's available online. There are books. There's a roadcraft book, the Police Riders Manual. It's available from Amazon and all of your big book resellers. The ACC website, which is www.rideforever.co.nz, has a large amount of resources as well. But it's really a case of just making sure there's a demand and having a standard, and then convincing people, and that's the hard part, is convincing people why they need to have someone look at their riding, because men are terrible. We all think we're great. We all think we're better than average.
Great. So thanks a lot, Carrie. Probably we will try and have a let me see if there are any more questions. While the questions come in, I think we will try and have a more focused session specifically on safety. I heard you saying that there are certain aspects of how you can keep your bike safe, or general precautions. We'll have to do this virtually because you're in the other part of the world. We will try and set up more sessions. I think some of us will with you and see if we can do that. Are there any other questions that people would like to ask? Let me just see. Okay, so
Venugopal.
Okay, you can unmute him. Venugopal. Okay, Venugopal, I have unmuted you. You can go ahead.
Hi guys, good evening. Sorry, actually I joined a little late. Because I don't use Zoom on my mobile, so I had to wait for the tab to be taken off by my son.
No worries. Go ahead with the question, please.
So no question as such.
Okay.
I was seeing people were putting some comments. So one of the comments I just put in is generally
Okay, fine. Srirab, next.
Yeah. All right. So I think Naveen, this question can probably be answered by you, and then maybe followed up by Carrie as well. We have speed signs and stickers put up in roads for safety, right? So do you think how effective is that here? And then I will follow it up with Carrie on how does New Zealand look at that. So we have speed signs, safety signs put up in roads. How does New Zealand go about it? But I'll start with Naveen and then probably let Carrie carry.
Yeah. I think the speed sign and the safety signs, the way we use them in India, and to the extent of effectiveness, I think we have a long way to go. I think there are many places where there is a caution required and we don't have a sign. So having more signs which are relevant is very important. The sign need to be in India being a multilingual country. We need signs at least in languages that people can understand. So if it's only in the local language, people can't understand. So at least a set of 3 languages so that there are more people who can understand the signs. The third thing that I would like to also bring about, that the licensing norms or the licensing procedure in India does not really insist for people to go through a structured training and learning. So I've tried it out myself. Many of the riders on the road themselves do not recognize the sign. So I think all the three aspects are important. Having more signs, definitely that is something that the governmental bodies need to do, and which are understandable. And as riders, understanding the signs and following them, all are critical. So I think we have a long, long way to go.
Sure. Gary, how do you look, how does New Zealand go about it in terms of creating awareness on roads, right, while people are driving?
New Zealand has some very strict standards around signs, and we've got we follow OECD conventions, so we're pretty consistent. One of the things, though, we teach motorcyclists or drivers, though, is not to rely just on signs. We teach them to read the environment, to look where power lines are going, look where hedges are going, think about the environment, because sometimes signs can be misleading. A sign might be missing, it might not be very well signed. So it's an important part of that taking. I talked before about taking information and using information. So signs are an important part of it, but they're not all of it. Part of the challenge is if you have too many signs, people stop reading them. So there's always that challenge between not enough information and getting people to read the environment, or too much information and then people get complacent and then stop reading signs. So there's a fine balance there. So you need a really good relationship with your road builders, but I really recommend that we teach riders to read the environment, regardless of signs. I think signs add to it.
All right. As a leading question, how does New Zealand look at penalties? There are, two schools of thought that it should be really steep so that, people follow it. But, I'm sure that it would be the way there. But, in India, there are two schools of thoughts, right? Because, can really people afford it so they don't take it seriously? So what's your, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. There was something I was really involved a lot in, because there's two elements to deterring people's behaviours. One is the penalty, but the other the other thing, which is more important, is the perception of being caught. So if you've got a really high penalty, but you don't think you're going to be caught because the enforcement is really lax or is absent, then it makes no difference. If you've got a very high perception of being caught, even if the penalty is lower, that's more effective. So it's not the penalties, but it's how the police work with the community to increase that perception of enforcement, or the likelihood of being caught. That's a really powerful tool. So we have dedicated highway patrol, and we've got a lot of policing resources on the road in New Zealand. My friend of mine is the chief executive officer of the Global Road Safety Partnership, and they're based in Switzerland. They're part of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. They're also partially funded by the World Bank, and they do a lot of work in countries, including India, on improving the standard of road policing. So you've got really professional people that know what they're doing, and they're really focused on trying to change behaviors, not just punish people.
All right. Naveen, do you have something to add on that? In terms of now we've seen that, penalties have gone higher, at least in some parts of India. That is a broader norm. Do you have any thoughts on that? Just to add to what Carrie said.
No, I think I agree with Carrie. I think what is important is that the fear of being caught, or the perception that you could be caught or policed, is very, very important, because that's the mindset. If we know that we may not be caught, or we can go scot-free, then whatever is the penalty does not make a difference. The only thing that I would like to add to what Carrie said is that this is my personal view. I think having large penalties is not very critical for all the penalties, but things that are wrong on the road that can harm others, those are things where the penalty should be really strong, whether financial penalty or in other ways. But for other things, the penalty could be lower, but the policing has to be stronger. So I would definitely recommend that drunken driving should have this strict, maximum penalty that is possible in any case, whether it is financial penalty or otherwise. But parking on the wrong side or speeding up a little, now these are things where I don't see that the having high penalty is critical, but the perception of being caught is more important.
Got it.
We had in New Zealand, we talked about the fatal five. There were 5 things that killed drivers, and we wanted police officers to focus the most on those. We didn't want picky little things. So, somebody's got a light out, it might be a reason to stop the car and talk to them, but that didn't kill people. So, and the things that killed people in New Zealand was speeding, drink driving and drug driving. Failing to wear seatbelts was really important, so important. Dangerous and careless driving behaviours, and also high-risk drivers also needed a focus. We had some people out there who really didn't care and they needed to be focused on. And it was really 5 things. And if you looked after those 5 things, everything else looked after itself pretty well.
Yep.
I think we have time for one last question. Carrie, thanks a lot for, I think we're short over time, but thanks for hanging around. So hazard management on roads, right? Probably post accidents or to avoid accidents. How does New Zealand look at hazard management on roads? Do you have any thoughts on that?
We have an agency here called the New Zealand Transport Agency, and they look after the state highways or the main highway network in New Zealand. So we have about 99,000 kilometres of state highways. And then we have local councils are responsible for their local roads. So, and they work to a fairly standard recipe, for want of a better word. So wherever you travel in New Zealand, the design of roads is the same, the signage is the same, whether you're at the top of the North Island or the bottom of the South Island. Speed limits are done consistently. So roads are pretty good. We've got some very high standard roads now with limits of 110 kilometres an hour. Our open road speed limit is 100 kilometres an hour, and that's a bit high for some of our rural roads. And the government wants to reduce some of those speed limits on the rural roads, but the community doesn't like it because people like to go fast. And so they resist bringing speed limits down. But when you bring them down, less people get killed. And it's as simple as that. So it's a constant fight.
All right. We have one question. Go ahead.
Hi, Carrie. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you are.
Hi, Carrie. I'm just a curious question. So I just wanted to know your New Zealand riding, passion. Like you have mountains, right? So how do you ride in mountains? Do you have clubs riders riding in mountains? And we have in India we have high altitude places where we ride to. So I'm just curious, like how is it different from India and New Zealand? We have this acute mountain sickness. Do you guys ride to mountains? Like, do you have that kind of terrain in New Zealand? I'm just curious about that.
Yes, I'm just struggling to understand. Just a poor microphone, but you're asking if we ride in mountains. We've got mountainous country here. Is that the question?
Yeah. Yes.
So yes, particularly in the South Island, we have some high passes. We don't have the equivalent of the Himalayas. We're not quite that tall, but we do have some reasonably high altitude riding, but not to the extent that it affects the fueling on motorcycles. Not like you would have in the Himalayas or in the some of the very high mountain ranges. So motorcycles with fuel injection cope very well with high altitudes. Older style carburetors not. They'll need to be jetted for high altitude conditions. But people who do a lot of touring in them get quite good at swapping out the main jets when they tour too, I think. But yeah, we get a bit of snow in winter down south, but but quite different conditions to India.
All right, I think we are getting to the end of the webinar today. Before I pass on to one of my colleagues who will sort of end the session with a thank you note, Carrie. Once again, thanks a lot, both Naveen and Carrie. To everybody else in the audience, this is first of the series of talks that we're going to have with Talk Tales. Carrie, I know it's going to be late for you, but we'd appreciate, whenever you have to join, or we'll be sure to share recordings of the future sessions. We have the coming weekend, we have international riders talk about, these are riders who've ridden internationally, speaking about their personal experience on both national and international biking. That's on the 28th of June. We also have Fauji riders, which is veteran riders from the army and other services, talking about their personal riding experiences. We will have these two sessions follow. And we also have the international riding sessions are going to be split into both male and female, ridings differently, not to discriminate, but to give both genders equal opportunity to talk about it. We will have, the female riders talk about taboos about female riders, myths and facts. We have a large number of female riders now in India. We'd like to give them an opportunity to talk about that. I'd like to now hand over to both Ashish and Jacob, who would probably end with a thank you note, and that will be the wrap up of the session. Ashish, over to you.
Thanks, Carrie, for joining us today, and Naveen sir. And Carrie, we have a lot of questions about safety, and everyone is curious about that one, to know what are the international standards you people are following and how can we know that. So definitely we will request you to one more session for the this safety measures and the morning timing, your morning timing. So we can join that one.
Sure.
So because it's one more day, so everybody is morning riding. So that's why we are taking up 4 o'clock. So next time we'll schedule on your morning time, and we will be joined there.
Okay.
And, thanks for joining. Thanks. And thanks, Naveen sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for joining today. And now handing over to Lieutenant Colonel Jacob.
Yeah, Jacob sir, over to you. You can give the closing comments for the webinar.
Thank you. It has been very wonderful to listen to everybody for the last about 1 hour plus. And we are, as a community of bikers, we are very grateful to Mr. Naveen Malhotra and Mr. Carrie Griffiths for sparing your valuable time, because you're busy people. We're very, very glad that you are here with us today. And we have immensely gained from whatever you spoke today. There are a lot of interesting things which came out today. And we are very impressed by the approach which New Zealand and Mr. Carrie have given to the motorcycling world and the way we ride, and how we can be kept safe and things like that. It was very, 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 it's an eye opener, and there is a lot to do from our side in this direction. And that is where Mr. Naveen Malhotra and such eminent people who are in the field, in the industry, who have been who are in the business of riding, and also in the business of making and selling and everything connected with it. That is where you all can influence and bring these good changes, where we save a lot of lives in this in this sport, in this industry, and hope we expand into other venues of sports and racing and things like that in a very safe way. So these are the things which so thank you very much for that. And Mr. Carrie, I think after hearing you, we are all inspired to come and ride a little in New Zealand.
Oh, good. It's a great place to ride. So once we get through COVID, it'll be a little while, I think, before anybody goes anywhere. But all the best for dealing with COVID in India. I know it's a real challenge all around the world at the moment.
Thank you. And thanks to all the viewers for logging in and making this session successful. And I know we see a few faces here, but we are all representing a bigger community. So let's go and spread this awareness to more and more people. I think this will get multiplied by 1,000 is what I feel. And thanks to Ashish and Sriram for conducting it in a very wonderful manner. All the best for this initiative of Talk Tales. let's bring value to the motorcycle community. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jacob. Thanks, everyone. That will be a wrap.
Thanks once again.
All of you have a great evening, great night. Carrie, thanks a lot for joining again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks. Good night. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Good night.
Good night.